I want to take this opportunity to add my voice to that of Kurt Hines to thank the Association for Baha'i Studies for responding to our pleadings of last year to touch not only our minds but to touch our hearts. And they have succeeded in that, and I thank them. I have been given 40 minutes. Dr. Aford would like me to cut my words. I'm going to say every word that I have planned. I'm going to talk very quickly, and I'm looking for Duncan Hank's hand to be raised if I talk too quickly. Since I was a young child, I have been fascinated by my own attitudes and by the attitudes of others towards people who look different from themselves, people of other races, religions, social classes, ethnic groups. Throughout my life, I have been both a participant and an observer in the processes that create barriers and tear down the barriers that separate people. Not the physical walls, but the walls of perceptions, the powerful forces that act on people and mold their views of themselves and others. I have also had occasions to be a participant in another drama, one in which the groups I was with seemed to resist the impulses and forces around them, and to see each other, not as colors and classes, as languages and nationalities, but as distinct and dynamic individuals with ideas, feelings, thoughts, and attitudes. Let me describe one of many experiences I have had that created in me and in the others in my group a sense of what I will call a global consciousness, a sense of the unity and interdependence with people of all races and nationalities, a feeling of being part of the whole, a sense of the power possessed by the group, a conviction that the product of the whole is greater than the contribution of any one individual. When I was taking a modern dance class in graduate school, I had a dance teacher who was at first an enigma to me. The class was very large, with 30 women ranging from 18 to 35 years old, of varying experience, varying abilities, and varying levels of motivation. The dance class was heterogeneous with respect to race, ethnic group, and social class. Before and after every class, the students grouped themselves together by race, by language, by age, and by ability level. I practiced very hard. I learned all the movements and waited for the teacher to single me out and to praise me for my hard work and technical skills. She did neither, nor did she praise others individually in the class. She walked around the room, observing closely what we each were doing, offering criticism and correction, but never praising us individually. She did, however, praise the entire class when we were all performing well and when we were working together as a unit. I was secretly irritated with her for this deviant teaching strategy. However, as the semester passed, and I accepted that she would not single me out, I noticed that a pattern was developing in the class. We were no longer competing with each other, we were collaborating with each other. Rather than focusing on how each of us could look better than anyone else, we were coming to focus on how we as a group could perform with precision, grace, beauty, and cohesiveness. At our final production, we experienced a great sense of exhilaration at the brilliance of our performance and the sense of accomplishment we felt as a group. We analyzed later what had taken place. We had performed like angels, yet no one was a star. We realized that it took 30 stars to create a brilliant performance. We had needed no conductor, for we moved as one body. We could sense each other's every movement, every feeling, intention, and breath. We did not each dance the same way, with the same abilities, technique, or body characteristics. We did not become the same. What we did become was so sensitive to each other by surrendering our concentration on ourselves that we did not need a director. I will never forget the moments in that class. They changed my attitudes and perceptions of other people. My moments in that class were, at that time, probably the closest that I would come to understanding what the Universal House of Justice meant in its statement, The Promise of World Peace, when it talked about the need for humanity to develop an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind. The experience in this class left all of us with changed attitudes. We had begun the term suspicious of one another and conscious of our differences. We ended the term with deep respect for one another and aware of our common bonds. We also gained a sense of what each of us as individuals could contribute to the group that no one else could contribute. I wondered at that time what principles were operating in this environment that created the changes in our attitudes. What were the elements in the organization of that environment that facilitated the change in entrenched values and attitudes about people? Knowing that the Baha'i teachings claim that attitudes are malleable, I began a study of the Baha'i writings to discover the processes for achieving an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind, and to discover how attitude changes occur. I will attempt here to explore the processes with you for achieving that change, and I'd like to invite you to join me in this exploration. What I have to say, however, will not be definitive. It will be a beginning of a study that I expect to continue for a long time and that I hope you will be curious enough about to join me in. It's a journey to discover the processes that will enable individuals, organizations, and societies to develop an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind. No one on the face of the earth has yet experienced the unity that is promised us in the Baha'i writings. We have no outstanding model to which we can turn and say, there it is, a culture in which people relate to each other as human beings, a culture free of social stratification based on color, race, religion, ethnic group, or language. There are, however, tiny evolving models of culture where a global consciousness does exist. These environments are the many classrooms the world over where the processes identified in the Baha'i teachings for achieving an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind are being applied. We can examine the results of this experimental research that is being conducted the world over. After I discuss the processes identified in the Baha'i writings, I will review the educational research where these processes have been applied. Before proceeding, I'd like to define two terms I will use, and they are global consciousness, and the other is education, as defined in the Baha'i teachings. I use the term global consciousness synonymously with an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind to describe that attitude that Abdu'l-Baha refers to as the great unselfish love for humanity that is bounded by none of these imperfect, semi-selfish bonds of race, class, politics, and community. A global consciousness to me is a recognition of the reality of human beings, those divine qualities and attributes that define us. A belief that we are dynamic and changing. An ability to make no assumptions about the way other people may think, feel, or behave based on the way they may look. An awareness of our unlimited diversity in the way we can combine our talents and abilities, qualities, and attributes. And education in the Baha'i writings applies to both the material and the spiritual development of individuals and societies. Not only is the material advancement of civilization dependent on education, but according to Abdu'l-Baha, the development of human beings, of their sense of human dignity and honor, is the result of education. True education leads a person to a global consciousness. In the statement on peace, the Universal House of Justice tells us that world order is dependent on our achieving a consciousness of our oneness as a species. They say, the primary question to be resolved is how the present world, with its entrenched pattern of conflict, can change to a world in which harmony and cooperation will prevail. World order can be founded only on an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind, a spiritual truth which all the human sciences confirm. They go on to say that recognition of this truth requires abandonment of prejudice, prejudice of every kind, race, class, color, creed, nation, sex, degree of material civilization, everything which enables people to consider themselves superior to others. Each of the barriers to peace has as its foundation an attitude, which, according to the Universal House of Justice, is based on a sense of superiority. Racism is supported by beliefs that one race is superior to others. Economic disparities are tolerated when groups believe that they have a fundamental right to live better than others. Nationalism is perpetrated by countries that believe that they have a superior ability to decide what economic systems and development practices should be applied in other countries. How do we overcome these barriers that have an underlying belief in the superiority of one group over another, of one language over another, of a country over another? Let us turn now to the Baha'i writings to identify the processes that are provided to us for creating a change in our attitudes about each other and for eliminating that sense of superiority. Although the writings do not provide us with an ordered list of these processes and an explicit description of the way they interact, my search in the Baha'i writings has uncovered the following set of 7 processes. These are all processes that can be used by the individual in his personal development, by groups of individuals in their relationships, and by organizations and governments in the conduct of their affairs domestically and internationally. I propose this list to you not as a conclusive statement of the processes in the Baha'i writings for a global consciousness, but rather as a point of discussion. I will review them here briefly. They are knowing oneself, worshiping the Creator, developing attitudes and attributes, acquiring knowledge, working together, forming institutions, and taking action by performing service. Knowing oneself is the first commandment for the age in which we live. By learning to know ourselves, we discover the gems of inestimable value that Baha'u'llah speaks about, those divine attributes and qualities that are combined in a unique manner in each human being. We learn that we have created you all from the same dust, so that no one should exalt himself over another. Knowledge of one's reality is the first step toward eliminating a sense of superiority, the root of all the barriers to achieving a global consciousness. The second is worshiping the Creator. Worshiping the Creator is a reciprocal process. It's probably the most important relationship we will have in our lifetime. When we worship the Creator, we pay honor to the creation by adoring the one who bestows joy upon the world. Our principal mode for worshiping the Creator is through the words brought to us by the manifestations of God for the day in which we live. Besides the joy that this relationship brings to the individual, there is power in the act of worship that binds hearts together. Its link to world peace is made clear in this statement by Abdu'l-Baha. The establishment of peace is unachievable save through the power of the Word of God. When we focus on the Word of God, we are united in working toward a common goal. This goal is revealed to us through the manifestations of God and the institutions that they establish. Number 3 is developing attitudes and attributes. Rather than being told that we are passive and unchanging beings, we are urged in the Baha'i teachings to practice behaviors and attitudes until they become part of our repertoire of behaviors. The Baha'i writings take an opposite view from the prevalent view, which is that we inherit our prejudicial attitudes from our parents. We are told that we are responsible for our perceptions of each other and that we can train ourselves to think differently. Listen to these active verbs used in the Baha'i writings. Visualize, call to mind, close your eyes to racial differences, concentrate all your thoughts on love and unity. Cleanse ye your eyes, and see ye, and so that ye behold no man as different from yourselves. See ye no strangers, rather see all men as friends. Look ye not upon the present, fix your gaze upon the times to come. Number 4 is acquiring knowledge. We are all commanded to acquire knowledge. Through our study of the sciences and the arts, we learn about the essential oneness of mankind. We learn, according to the promise of world peace, that anthropology, physiology, psychology recognize only one human species, albeit infinitely varied in the secondary aspects of life. Knowledge alone, however, does not promote a change in our attitudes about others. Rather, when knowledge is combined with acts of service towards others, then changes take place in our perceptions. The 5th process is working together. In this category, I have included the processes of consulting, of consorting together, of associating, of engaging in fellowship. Each of these actions has as its base interacting and cooperating with one another. I believe that of all the processes I am presenting, this is the one that is least discussed and analyzed, and the effects of which are least appreciated. Its importance, however, is great. Says Abdu'l-Baha, all progress is the result of association and cooperation. When we work together, we discover the true reality of people because we see them at work. We witness their creativity. We see the fruit of their talents, the fruit of their divine attributes and capacities and love. The 6th is forming new institutions. Each of the processes we have discussed finds its outlet in the new institutions that the Baha'i writings tell us provide the pattern for a future society. These institutions incorporate the principles of consultation, of service, of the acquisition of knowledge, of an emphasis on working together, collaboratively, and of maintaining a vision of the goal and on the future rather than on the past. The institutions provide the structure and the support for the activities of the individuals and the vehicle for collectively addressing the problems and needs of the community. The institutions preserve the rights of the individual, but ensure that the individuals focus on the welfare of the community as a whole. And number 7 is taking action by performing acts of service. The Baha'i writings stress the importance of acting on one's beliefs. It is not sufficient to talk of pious hopes and desires. These must be translated into reality. In her essay on the Baha'i approach to social and economic development, Holly Vick explains the dynamic relationship between worship, the development of attitudes and attributes, service, all under the direction of the institutions. She says, the spiritual impulse of the worshipper is transformed into action through service. A process of continual human advancement is set in motion as each believer, while striving to perfect himself, devotes his energy to the good of the community under the direction of the local spiritual assembly. In order for thoughts to become manifested in action, however, the individual or the organization must have a will. According to the Universal House of Justice, when we accept the spiritual principles or values, the very act of our acceptance produces an attitude, a dynamic, a will, and aspiration which facilitates the discovery and implementation of practical measures. Although I have spoken about each of these processes in the context of the individual and his spiritual development, it's important for us to remember that these processes are applicable to all relationships and at all levels of society. Shoghi Effendi makes clear this link. The principle of the oneness of mankind is applicable not only to the individual, but concerns itself primarily with the nature of those essential relationships that must bind all the states and nations as members of one family. It implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. I would now like to turn to the literature on educational environments and to continue our study of the processes that create an attitude of global consciousness. The classroom environment can be looked upon as a laboratory for the application of the processes identified in the Baha'i writings for achieving a global consciousness. I'll describe the research results on the application of these processes in the classroom setting. I do this not because these principles and processes are only applicable to small groups, but because we have no other example of controlled settings where these processes have been applied. I ask you, therefore, to make the conceptual leap and apply what we learn from this research to the relationships within and among larger institutions and international bodies. I was first attracted to the literature in the 1970s. My attention was drawn to several early desegregation studies, and particularly the research of Gordon Allport, the work of Martin Deutsch, Elliot Aronson, Robert Slavin, and later to Roger and David Johnson. Prolific writers and researchers have conducted more than 27 experimental studies of what has come to be called cooperative learning principles or strategies. Research on the practical application of cooperative principles of learning began in the 1970s. The methods the researchers applied were based on Gordon Allport's theory called contact theory, in which he stated, prejudice may be reduced by equal status contact between majority and minority groups in the pursuit of common goals. The effect is greatly enhanced if this contact is sanctioned by institutional supports, and if it is of a sort that leads to the perception of common interests and common humanity between members of the two groups. We can certainly draw a parallel to what we have learned from the Baha'i processes. According to this theory, for contact to produce genuine liking among individuals, the following conditions must be present. There must be equal status interaction between members of different groups. Cooperative interdependence must exist in their interactions. They must have intimate as opposed to superficial contact, and there must be a presence of egalitarian norms. Few school activities, however, provide opportunities for students to have contact on an equal footing, and most associations in schools are of a superficial nature. The only exception, according to Slavin, are school sports, where students are of equal status, where they need to cooperate, and they frequently have non-superficial contact because they must get to know each other in order to develop strategies. Slavin's research indicates that students on sports teams tend to have more interethnic and interracial friends than do other students. Although there are wide variations in the methods used by teachers the world over, we can generalize about competitive and cooperative and individualistic strategies for instruction, and I will review those briefly. In competitive education, an individual can achieve his goal only if the other participants cannot achieve their goals. In cooperative interaction, an individual can achieve his or her mutual goal only if the other participants also achieve their goals. In individualistic education, whether or not another person achieves his goal is unrelated to the activities of others. Within the field of cooperative learning, at least 7 well-researched methods exist. Although these methods differ markedly from each other, they each share a set of core practices, which I will review. A teacher assigns students in the class to groups, each made up of 4 to 6 students. Each group has high achievers and low achievers and average achievers in the group. There are boys and girls in the group, and they are mixed by race, ethnic group, and linguistic background. All students are required to perform a specific task. Each student in the group is given a unique role. The focus is on the accomplishment of the group as a whole, and students must help each other in order for the goal to be achieved. We can draw a parallel to the principles and processes that we identified earlier in the Baha'i writings. In many of the experimental studies that I reviewed, students were exposed to these strategies for only 55 minutes a day out of the entire school day, and for a period of only 2 weeks out of the entire school year. Considering that students are exposed to traditional practices for the remainder of the day and the remainder of the year, the fact that the effects are sustained when students are tested 1 year later is a testimony to the potency of these practices. I'll describe one approach only to cooperative learning, and that is called the jigsaw method, developed by Elliot Aronson. In this approach, a class is divided into groups of 4 or 5 students. All of the groups are given the same task to perform. For example, a study of the life of Benjamin Franklin, who was a noted figure in history in the United States. Within each group, a member is given primary responsibility for a unique part of the unit. For example, one student would have the inventions of Franklin, another the political life of Franklin, a third student the childhood of Benjamin Franklin. Each group member then leaves his home group and goes to work with other students from the other groups who are assigned the same area of content, and these are called expert groups. The expert groups meet together and share information and learn from each other. Then the students return to their home group and teach the other classmates in their group their area of expertise, and they all become proficient in the content of Benjamin Franklin's life. Then, when they are assured that everyone knows the information, they are all tested individually. All students are expected to excel, and all can achieve a grade of A or 100%. This approach can be contrasted with typical traditional approaches when students work individually. They are grouped homogeneously according to ability. They do not share information. They are graded on the curve and compete to receive the highest grade, and they must distinguish themselves from all others in order to achieve. 2 meta-analyses of this research conducted by Slavin and also by Johnson and Johnson yielded what to me are exciting research results. There are 20 of them. I will only review 5 or 6 of them for you. I urge you to read the literature, however. Students in cooperative groups develop a genuine liking for each other. The researchers say that when students work together and help each other, they learn about each other's abilities. It is interesting to note that academic achievement on the part of all students increases, the low ability students and the high ability students. Students in these groups have statistically significantly more friendships with students of other ethnic and racial linguistic groups. And students in these groups have a higher sense of self-esteem. The researchers say when they are given a specific task to perform and develop expertise in it, and it's recognized by others, their self-esteem increases. What is striking to me about these learning methods is that they not only produce increased learning and increased cooperation within the class, but the results are generalized outside of the classroom. In a follow-up of students, after they were in classes using cooperative learning methods for 1 hour a day for a 2-week period, 1 year after this treatment, students who had been in cooperative groups named as their friends students of other racial and ethnic groups 4 times as many times as did students who were in competitive groups. They had 4 times as many friends. There's one study of cooperative learning processes that attracted my attention in my review of the literature, and this is called cooperative controversy. In this approach, each member of a group is given a role to play in writing a report on a rationale for either hunting and killing wolves or for protecting and preserving wolves. Some students are assigned to the role of conservationist and researcher, and the others are assigned to the role of hunters and dairy farmers. Students participate in a 4-day sequence where they become proficient in information about wolves and about the controversy procedures themselves. Then they prepare their partners and they engage in an argument on the issues with students who take the opposing view. Following this presentation, the students must reverse their role and assume the role of the other group. And then they present the opposing view. Following these discussions, the students meet together, and their attempt is to achieve consensus, to discuss the issues and agree upon the solutions that are to be followed. The researchers observed that in this strategy, students who participated in the cooperative controversy groups reported higher levels of internal conflict than did the students who were in competitive groups. There was more conflict in these cooperative controversy groups than in the competitive groups. The authors, however, do not look upon this conflict as negative. They suggest that the creative process requires a certain degree of conflict so that students ask questions and issues, listen to each other, challenge their own ideas, and formulate their own views. They suggest that in competitive groups, it may be that the external threat of losing stifles internal disagreement. When I first reviewed this concept of competitive controversy, I was surprised by the assertion that conflict is a necessary part of cooperation, particularly in light of my understanding of the Baha'i teachings with respect to consultation, and my understanding that if there is conflict in the process of consultation, then that will inhibit the achievement of the goal. However, I realized that there is a considerable difference between a dispassionate but impassioned analysis of the issues on the one hand and an insistence on one's point of view and identification with that position on the other hand. In fact, Abdu'l-Baha talks about the importance of conflict in allowing the truth to be revealed. He says, "So they, the members, must confer and consult in such a way that neither disagreement nor abhorrence may occur. When meeting for consultation, each must use perfect liberty in stating his views and unveiling the proof of his demonstration. If another contradicts him, he must not become excited, because if there is no investigation or verification of questions and matters, the agreeable view will not be discovered, neither understood. The brilliant light comes from the collision of thoughts. The brilliant light which comes from the collision of thoughts is the lightener of facts." Another noteworthy result of the processes in cooperative learning is that students tend to develop a differentiated view of each other as opposed to a stereotypical view. Because each student is responsible for explaining to others his subject of expertise or his view, the other students have an opportunity to listen to him and to appreciate the diversity of thinking styles, abilities, and characteristics of each individual. One of the criteria for improving race relations, according to Alport, is a perception on the part of individuals that they have a common identity. Students who work together in cooperative groups develop perceptions of each other as capable and responsible people. When students are placed in cooperative contact in situations in which they might not ordinarily engage, and they are given a common goal, their initial stereotypical view of each other is invalidated by the empirical evidence they gather during the course of working together. I will summarize by linking the processes identified in the Baha'i writings to the outcomes of cooperative learning activities. Students learn about themselves, their contributions to the group, and their nature as cooperative and responsible group members. Students may not necessarily engage in an act of worship, but they do focus on the result of the act of worship, which is sharing a common goal. Students develop attitudes and attributes of responsibility, patience, a belief in the abilities of their fellow students, of their capacity to care, and to respect the view of others and to listen to others. Students acquire knowledge about their common humanity, and they develop expertise in a subject. They learn to work together on an equal footing. They form what can be likened to new institutions based on cooperation and collaboration, not on competition. They take action by serving others, by helping their fellow classmates, by their commitment to all group members learning the material. What have we learned from uncovering the processes identified in the Baha'i writings for developing an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind? And what have we learned from the application of these processes in controlled classroom settings? I believe it is important both in the context of the Baha'i community and in cooperative learning classrooms to remember that associations that produce amity and concord do not occur naturally. They must be engineered. Whether in schools, in the Baha'i communities, or in any of our associations, they require a conscious structuring of activities and events. For example, there is no reason to believe that high-achieving students will spontaneously help low achievers in a class, or that they will instinctively believe that low-achieving students have something valuable to contribute to the class. There is also no reason to believe that a group of Baha'is who come together to consult will intuitively understand how to structure that consultation. We don't automatically love each other by reading beautiful words about the human family. We must each undergo a transformation in our thinking and our behavior. Conscious effort and will are required to reverse or modify the typical methods that are employed by schools, businesses, and governments in their deliberations, which are generally competitive rather than cooperative. We are told by Abdu'l-Baha that our attitudes and behaviors are contagious and that our actions can affect the people with whom we interact. Whether within our families, in our social groups, within our government bodies, our international institutions, the application of these processes to our associations will break down the sense of superiority that is the primary barrier to achieving a global consciousness. We have learned in this review of the literature that the processes identified in the Baha'i writings are so potent that they can transform the nature of our relationships. Remember, students who had non-superficial contact for only 1 hour a day for a 2-week period had significantly more friendships with students of other racial and ethnic groups. What can we offer with our knowledge of the processes for creating a global consciousness and with the evidence of their effect? I suggest that we examine all of our interactions, whether in our relationships with a few individuals or in the organizational settings where we spend our lives, to see where the processes we have studied can be implemented. We really need no further evidence of their potency. We only need remember Abdu'l-Baha's words regarding the rightness of the times for the implementation of these practices and his promise to us of the consequence of our actions. The age has dawned when human fellowship will become a reality. The century has come when all religions shall be united. The dispensation is at hand when all nations shall enjoy the blessings of international peace. The cycle has arrived when racial prejudice will be abandoned by tribes and peoples of the world. The epoch has begun wherein all native lands will be conjoined in one great human family. For all mankind shall dwell in peace and security beneath the shelter of the great tabernacle of the one living God.